Edit Me Mondays are where I look back at old projects I've created for clients and explain my process and workflow. I'm a senior editor here at Redline Studios Post Department in New York City, and cutting all kinds of projects for the past 2 decades, I've really seen it all. Hopefully, in revisiting these projects of the past, I can help you with any edits you might have in the present or future. Today, we're taking a look back at Fetish. When I look back on projects I've worked on over the past 20 years, so many come to mind: the good, the bad, and the ugly. But today's Edit Me Monday brings back nothing but great memories as I revisit the short narrative film called Fetish, starring Joan Collins and my good friend, Charles Casillo. This film was shot in 2010, and it really was a dream project for me. I was brought in as the director, and I was lucky enough to also cut the film myself. Lucky enough. Think about those words. They do carry a lot of weight. In this industry, it's easy to take opportunities for granted, but now, looking back, I really do appreciate things like this and the creative freedom they allowed. I remember back when I met my personal idol and hero. I talk about him here all the time, Terrence Malick. When I got to meet him, he used the language, "if I'm lucky enough to make another picture." And I just remember that small phrase striking me pretty hard. Someone with his level of success and access and accomplishment remaining humbly optimistic and still thankful, assuming nothing despite his success. But let's focus here on Fetish. As a director myself, I storyboard everything, and I have a strong sense of how I expect the edit to unfold. Coming from a comic book background, I often see things in frames. So, my own approach to editing my own work is, interestingly enough, very different from when I cut something for someone else. When I cut my own work, I follow a very well organized, predetermined plan, almost like a map. When I edit for someone else, it's more about discovering what that structure is from the footage, almost like decoding a message. Outside directors often shoot in a looser, more spontaneous style, not sure of how it's going to work in post, and I am the complete opposite. I want to know firmly how it's going to cut together and ensure it's actually going to work. Think of it this way. You can cover a scene very broadly, moving your camera around and capturing multiple angles, and then figuring it out later in post how it's all going to come together. Or you can plan your coverage with the edit in mind and anticipate when and where you'll cut from one setup to another. Neither approach is wrong, and they are both similar, but one is just a little more riskier and the other is a little bit more predetermined. So it really comes down to a matter of preference. For Fetish, I knew I was going to be editing it in post, so the focus for me on set was not really about finding the right shots, it was about finding the right performances that I captured in my alternate takes. I tend to know how my cuts are going to flow in the edit in terms of framing and direction. But then it becomes more about discovering what works in tone or execution from the actors when we're on set, and knowing when I might deviate from my plan. My philosophy as a filmmaker has always been this: have a plan, have a very clear plan, but always be ready to break from it. The post process on this project did go very smoothly. I remember most of my preconceived sequences did work as intended, although there were a few compromises, and then there were a few things that fell flat and fell short of my expectations. I remember there was one scene where the way in which the protagonist kind of gets startled from a weird moment, it didn't really land the way I wanted it to in the edit. You have to remember this, though, when making a film. Even when you've got crazy OCD and you can plan everything, there's always going to be moments that you deviate from that plan. It's just part of the process. You have to be flexible, and the key is to know when to compromise and when to stick to your guns. I do remember that my plan with regard to the shot selections was to keep things fairly simple and fairly classic. Another great director who I admire, who I think flies way under the radar, is Clint Eastwood. And if you look at his films, the framing and the composition is incredibly smart, yet it's very simple and doesn't try to do too much. There's no crazy rigs, there's no wires, there's no tricks, there's no gizmos or gadgets. There is a very classic feel of execution to his films, and I was kind of going for the same thing. I didn't want the camera to overpower the talent. I wanted it to simply capture the talent in their moments. Now, this plays into the editing, because how a film is shot, in my opinion, should often dictate how the edit is led. In a film like Fetish, where it was classically shot and not trying to do too much, it wouldn't really make sense for me to then go in the edit and try to make it this crazy Kill Bill montage that has this really aggressive feel. We shot on a Red camera, which was still relatively new at the time. This was around 2009, 2010, and even though I know a few videos back I just talked about how much I love the Canon cameras, well, for this project, the Red did make sense. It was brand new, and honestly, we wanted to give it a go, and it was a great experience. We shot in 4K RAW, and we transcoded to ProRes HQ. I remember cutting the offline in ProRes, then we matched back to the RAW footage for color grading. I had guidance from my mentor and good friend, Alexis Van Herkman, who also ended up being the colorist on the film. So one interesting aspect of this edit was how we handled the grade in the online. The film is kind of this sci-fi horror short, a bit Twilight Zone-like, somewhere living in between color and black and white, very desaturated. So when we got to the online, we intentionally dialed back some of those beautiful and glossy shots that we captured on set. Now, working with someone like Joan Collins, who is known for her glamour and her glitz, this was kind of a bold move at the time, but she trusted me completely and allowed herself to be seen in a much more vulnerable, raw way on camera that I don't think she really had done in the past. We only briefly discussed this creative choice, but I knew that she knew exactly what I was trying to do, and I really do appreciate, even still to this day, her for trusting me and making this creative choice, because really, she's the one taking all of the creative risk here. She is someone historically known as being a sex symbol, and so for her to kind of dial that back and to almost be grounded and humanized was a risk that she didn't have to take, but she did for the good of the film. It's funny, I even remember a family member of hers at one of these screenings complimenting me later for being able to get her to come out of her comfort zone like this, whereas many would have been afraid to even ask. I will say this, when some of the producers and crew saw the final grade of the film, they were absolutely taken aback because it was so drastically different from the images that we saw on set. Those were glossy, those were beautiful, those were refined and super high res, and we really wanted to almost strip that down a bit. So what am I talking about? In basic terms, we essentially made the film look less pretty. This actually highlights a really good lesson for editors and colorists out there, and directors included. Sometimes your job is to also educate and guide your collaborators through the creative decisions, especially when it comes to stylized work that may initially make people feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Changes in sound, in color, in pacing can feel really jarring at first to some people, to actresses, to executive producers, and it's very common for this to happen. A great pop culture story you can kind of look up to reference what I'm talking about is check out how they made the film Payback with Mel Gibson. They shot that film and then eventually bleached the prints to desaturate them and really give them a distinctive look in the edit. What's funny is, years later, they eventually released a more, quote, normal-looking version of the film, and it really did not have the same impact, and that is a great way to kind of examine how color can affect the viewer's experience and how they absorb the content in front of them. Looking back at the scenes I loved most when it comes to the editorial of this project, one does stick out above the rest, and that is the TV set. I remember the idea of starting on a shot of a close-up of our actress, and then you start to reveal that it's really not a shot within our film, but a shot within the shot of the TV set that she is sitting on. And so it becomes this kind of world within a world. The idea was supposed to be that it's very voyeuristic, that someone's always watching. Then I remember we had this really nice shot where it kind of booms up to this microphone that's listening to our host and our actress, and it kind of comes into view. And then the audio that we're hearing as watchers of this film goes from normal to being a bit distorted. Just again, a constant remembrance and reminder that someone is always watching, someone is always listening.
Okay, so how am I doing so far?
Well, what do you think I think?
Well, what do you think I think you think?
I think that they think that you think that I think that you're wonderful.
It was a lot of fun to kind of play with these layers of this world within a world, and what is the TV show, and what is the film, and where does that line get blurred? Where does it end? I also remember a bit of a happy accident happening on set. If you take a look at the set, with the eyes behind the main characters. This was always meant to be this larger than life kind of face, this godly figure, this strange kind of abstract thing that is watching them. And then when we got to filming it, the eyes started to kind of fall out of sync. And I remember on set kind of getting pissed off at first, going like, we have to fix this. This looks weird. But then as I really started to look at it through the lens, I kind of started to embrace it. I kind of left it as it was. It gave us this really eerie feeling that this almost like Eye of Sauron had a life of its own. And so it was kind of a happy accident. And it's a reminder to just let things kind of play out sometimes. Sometimes the film takes a life of its own and you almost have to just let it be. This is also a good example of the predetermined shots I was talking about earlier being executed in post. The way this scene kind of played out in the edit is exactly how I envisioned it in storyboards and exactly how we shot it. It didn't need to change course in the edit. We just need to kind of follow the map that was put there for us in the early pre-production and production stages. I love the small little kind of in-camera tricks that we did here, the subtle things such as the slight changes in audio quality, or even just something as simple as this little dissolve that we did from the rounded camera lens to the round set stage there, that the platform that they're sitting on. Those little things I absolutely love because they're subtle, but they're effective. And I love as an editor matching shapes, matching positive and negative space. That balance is something I am always looking for. In looking at Fetish, if there's one editorial takeaway that I would say comes from revisiting it, it's this. As a director and editor, you gotta have a vision, but be open to happy accidents and changes and expanding upon that original vision. Trust your collaborators, trust your instincts, and be ready to explain your creative choices and never underestimate the power of subtle, intentional choices when shaping tone and emotion. What makes for a good edit is not always the obvious, but often the slight and the subtle. This film was so much fun to make. It was short, it was stylized, it was kind of unique, and just a lot of creativity really being explored. You can find it out there on iTunes and other streaming platforms, and we've got a few short scenes cut and available up on our show reels section at our website. I hope you enjoyed this Edit Me Monday, where I took a look back at an old project for a client to discuss the process that went into making the cut. Every edit we break down here is also available to screen in its entirety on our website at www.redlinestudios.net. Do you have an old edit or a current one you're working on that you'd like my thoughts on? Send it to me and I'll feature it here on a future Edit Me Monday video.